My name is Margaret Maggie Sullivan. I'm 49 years old, divorced, and I've worked steady jobs my entire adult life. No inheritance. No handouts. Just hard lessons in my own paycheck. And the night my parents laughed and said I'd never own a house like my sisters was the night I started building one they'd never forget. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Every share helps these stories reach someone who needs to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going. My mother raised her wine glass and smiled across the dinner table. "Sweetheart," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you'll never have a house like your sisters. Some people just aren't built for that level of success." My father chuckled into his napkin. My sister Victoria squeezed her husband's hand and said nothing to defend me. They were celebrating Victoria's brand new custom home, 5 bedrooms, granite countertops, and a view of the lake that cost more than I'd earned in 5 years. I had just admitted I was still renting at 47. The silence after her words felt heavier than the laughter. Then my mother added with a sympathetic tilt of her head, "Stability just isn't your strength, honey." Something inside me finally broke. I smiled back at her, hiding the fury behind my teeth. But that night, I made a decision. I would never sit powerless at their table again. I left dinner early, mumbling something about an early morning. As I grabbed my coat from the hallway, I heard their voices drifting from the dining room. "She never bounced back after the divorce," my father said quietly. "Victoria was always the smart investment," my mother replied. Investment. That single word landed like a stone in my chest. They hadn't just emotionally favored my sister. They'd financially backed her dreams while leaving me to struggle alone. Suddenly, a decade of memories clicked into place like puzzle pieces I'd been ignoring. Every time I asked for help and heard, "We can't afford it right now." Every time Victoria got exactly what she needed without even asking. I walked to my car in the cold air, hands shaking. Something had shifted permanently inside me. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about that word. Investment. I started asking careful questions during family calls, digging gently into Victoria's success story. Finally, my aunt mentioned it casually over coffee. "Your parents gave Victoria $80,000 for her down payment. Didn't they tell you?" $80,000. I sat frozen, the coffee going cold in my hands. When I'd asked for help 5 years ago after my divorce left me financially devastated, they'd told me they couldn't afford to help. They'd suggested I move back home instead, into their basement like a failure returning to the nest. I didn't cry that day. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote a single sentence at the top. If I'm going to build something, it'll be without them. I made a decision that terrified me. Instead of wallowing or complaining to anyone who'd listen, I cashed out what little remained in my 401k from the retail management job I'd hated for years. The penalty hurt, but I had a plan. I enrolled in a certification program for property appraisal. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was practical, stable, and most importantly, it was a field where experience and attention to detail mattered more than connections or family money. Nobody in my family knew what I was doing. I didn't announce it at Sunday dinners or post about it online. Let them keep believing I was aimless and unstable. Let them think I'd never amount to anything without their help. While they whispered about my failures, I'd be building something they couldn't see coming. 6 months into the program, my landlord called with bad news. Rent was increasing by $300 a month. My savings were already stretched thin from tuition and living expenses. I sat on my apartment floor that night, surrounded by textbooks and practice appraisal reports, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. My mother called that same week, her voice dripping with concern. "I heard about your rent situation, honey. You know, you could always move into our basement. Just temporarily, of course." I knew exactly what that meant. A daily reminder of everything I wasn't. A constant comparison to Victoria's success. A life sentence of being the family disappointment. My voice was steady when I answered. "No, thank you. I'll figure it out." I hung up and doubled down on my studies instead. One of my instructors, a man named Mr. Harrison with 30 years in the business, pulled me aside after class one evening. His weathered face showed genuine interest as he reviewed my latest assignment. "You've got an eye for this," he said simply. "Most people see houses. You see value and potential. That's rare." He offered me a junior position at his small appraisal firm. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover my increased rent, but it came with real experience and mentorship. For the first time in years, someone saw me as capable instead of broken. I accepted immediately, shaking his hand firmly. That night, I allowed myself a small celebration, cheap champagne in a paper cup, alone in my apartment. Through work, I discovered something that made me pause. Through casual conversations with other appraisers, I learned something interesting about Victoria's neighborhood. The entire development had been massively overvalued during the housing surge 2 years earlier. I pulled the public records out of professional curiosity. Adjustable rate mortgage. Stretch financing that assumed continuous income growth. The purchase timing couldn't have been riskier. Her dream home, the one my parents had helped fund and constantly praised, wasn't nearly as secure as everyone believed. The foundation of their golden child's success had cracks nobody else could see yet. I didn't mention this to anyone. I simply filed the information away and continued focusing on my own path. But I started paying very close attention to market trends and interest rate forecasts. Something told me this information would matter eventually. Thanksgiving arrived with its usual family theater. My mother passed around fresh photos of Victoria's latest renovation, a chef's kitchen with custom cabinets and designer fixtures. Then she looked directly at me across the table. "Maybe one day you'll have something like this too," she said with gentle pity that felt worse than mockery. Victoria didn't stop her. She didn't change the subject or defend me. She just smiled softly and accepted another compliment about her impeccable taste. That's when I finally understood something painful but clarifying. My sister wasn't a passive victim in this family dynamic. She enjoyed being on that pedestal. She liked being the successful one while I played the role of cautionary tale. The realization didn't make me angry anymore. It made me focused. Instead of chasing trendy neighborhoods or trying to compete with Victoria's flashy lifestyle, I began studying areas nobody else was watching. Working-class communities with solid bones, slowly improving infrastructure, and families who'd lived there for generations. Small homes with strong foundations. Properties that needed vision instead of money. I saved aggressively. No vacations. No new car. No expensive dinners or trendy clothes. Every extra dollar went into a high-yield savings account. Mr. Harrison taught me to read neighborhoods like stories, looking at zoning changes, school district investments, and business development patterns that signaled future growth. While my family focused on immediate appearances, I was learning to see 5 and 10 years into the future. Patience became my secret weapon. They thought I was treading water. I was actually preparing to swim. The market shifted faster than anyone expected. Interest rates climbed steadily, month after month. Suddenly, the luxury homes that had been selling within days started sitting on the market for weeks, then months. Victoria's neighborhood cooled first. The lakefront properties that had seemed like guaranteed investments stopped appreciating. Some even dropped in value. I noticed the change in Victoria's social media posts. Fewer pictures of the house. More complaints about property taxes and homeowners association fees. Her husband's real estate development company was mentioned less frequently. My parents stopped bragging about the house during family dinners. The conversation topics shifted to other things, travel plans, the grandkids, anything but real estate. I didn't celebrate their discomfort. I just watched and waited, knowing my moment would come. A file landed on my desk at work one Tuesday morning. Standard divorce sale assessment in an older neighborhood I'd been quietly monitoring for months. The address made my pulse quicken. I knew this street. I'd driven past it several times, admiring the mature trees and brick homes with character that new developments couldn't replicate. The house needed work. That was clear from the photos. Ugly kitchen from the 1980s. Dated bathroom fixtures. Scuffed hardwood floors and chipped paint. But the bones were excellent. Solid brick construction. Good roof. Updated electrical. No foundation issues. The divorcing couple had priced it low, desperate for a quick sale. Nobody wanted a fixer-upper in this market. I saw something different. I saw potential that matched my savings account. I saw my future. I submitted an offer $15,000 below asking price, holding my breath for 3 days until I heard back. When my phone rang with the acceptance, my hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the device. The closing process felt surreal. Signing papers alone, no family there to witness or celebrate. The real estate agent kept asking if I wanted to wait for my husband, and each time I calmly corrected her, no husband, just me. When I received the keys, I sat in my car outside the house for 10 minutes, staring at the modest brick exterior that was now mine. This wasn't marble or granite. There was no lake view or chef's kitchen. But it was completely, entirely mine. No cosigners. No family loans. No strings attached to someone else's approval. That feeling was worth more than any of Victoria's upgrades. When I finally told my parents I'd bought a house, their reaction told me everything I needed to know about their expectations for me. My father paused mid-sip of his coffee. "Well," he said carefully, "it's a start, I suppose." My mother's face did that thing where she tried to look supportive but couldn't hide her concern. "Are you certain the neighborhood is safe, honey? Have you researched the crime statistics?" Victoria didn't visit. She sent a brief text, "Congrats on the house," with no offer to come see it, no genuine interest in this milestone. I realized I'd been waiting my whole life for their approval, their pride, their recognition. And I was done waiting. I stopped sending them pictures or updates. If they wanted to see what I was building, they'd have to come to me. And I wasn't going to beg them to show up. Over the next 3 years, I watched my neighborhood transform. A new coffee shop opened on the corner. Then a small bookstore. A family-owned restaurant replaced the abandoned laundromat. Property values began climbing steadily. Nothing dramatic, but consistent and reliable. I renovated carefully, doing much of the work myself on weekends. I learned to refinish hardwood, watched YouTube videos about tile installation, and discovered I had steady hands for detail painting. The brick exterior cleaned up beautifully. The hardwood floors glowed after sanding and fresh stain. I planted a garden in the backyard, tomatoes, herbs, flowers that attracted butterflies. Slowly, quietly, my house became something beautiful. Not flashy or magazine-worthy, but warm and solid and utterly mine. Neighbors started stopping by to compliment the transformation. "You've really brought this place back to life," an elderly woman told me over the fence one Saturday. I smiled, knowing she had no idea what those words meant to me. Victoria called me on a Wednesday evening, her voice carrying a tremor I'd never heard before. "Maggie, I need to talk to you about something." The story came out in pieces. Her husband's commission-based income had dropped significantly. The adjustable mortgage rate had increased twice. Money was suddenly tight in ways it had never been before. They were refinancing to get some breathing room. My parents had co-signed a second loan to help them remodel the kitchen last year, and now that payment was ballooning too. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said honestly, and I meant it. Watching my sister struggle brought me no joy. But when she hesitated, clearly working up to asking for something, I redirected gently. "I'm sure you and Mom and Dad will figure something out." I didn't offer to help. I didn't offer advice or money or connections. For once, I didn't try to solve a problem that wasn't mine. 3 months later, I drove past Victoria's house to visit a client nearby. A real estate sign stood prominent on the perfect lawn, slightly tilted by last night's wind. Luxury homes weren't moving in this market. I'd seen the data at work. Properties in her price range were sitting for 6 months or longer, often requiring price reductions to attract serious buyers. They'd listed it too high initially, probably believing their upgrades and the lake view justified the premium. Now it had been on the market for over 90 days with one price reduction already. My parents had gone strangely quiet during our last few family dinners. No more bragging about Victoria's success. No more comparisons between us. The silence was deafening and telling. I knew from experience in my field what that sign represented. Financial pressure, probably stress in Victoria's marriage, my parents absorbing losses on their cosign loan. My mother's voice sounded smaller than usual when she called on a Saturday morning. "Maggie, honey, I was hoping we could talk about something sensitive." The request came out carefully rehearsed. They needed help bridging a temporary gap with some expenses. Nothing specific, just vague financial assistance that wouldn't be paid back anytime soon, if ever. After decades of being told I wasn't stable enough to manage my own life, after being compared unfavorably to Victoria at every family gathering, they were asking me for money. My voice stayed calm and professional. "I don't mix finances with family relationships. I've learned that lesson the hard way, and it's a boundary I need to maintain." The silence on the other end stretched long and uncomfortable. "I understand," my mother finally said, though her tone suggested she didn't understand at all. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt clear about my boundaries for the first time in my life. A file appeared on my desk at work with an address that made me freeze mid-reach for my coffee. I recognized Victoria's Street immediately, then confirmed the exact house number. My sister's home was being appraised, either for refinancing or sale preparation. Either way, it meant the financial pressure had intensified. Professional ethics required disclosure. I immediately informed Mr. Harrison about the family conflict of interest. He reassigned the appraisal to another team member, nodding with understanding. "These situations happen," he said kindly. "You did the right thing." But I'd already seen the preliminary market analysis attached to the file. The neighborhood values had stagnated. Their purchase price plus renovations minus current market value meant one thing clearly. They were underwater on the mortgage. Victoria's dream house had become a financial anchor pulling them down. I closed the file and returned to my other work, but the numbers stayed in my mind. Meanwhile, my neighborhood was declared a city revitalization priority zone. New funding for the elementary school. A community park renovation. Small business development grants that attracted young entrepreneurs. My property value assessment came back with numbers that made me read them 3 times to believe. The equity I'd built in 3 years exceeded what Victoria had gained in 5, even with her parents' $80,000 head start. My modest brick house in the unsafe neighborhood had appreciated at a higher percentage than her custom lakefront home ever had during its best years. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't mention it at family dinners. I just quietly updated my financial records and allowed myself a moment of profound satisfaction. The market had proven what my family never believed. I had always been capable. I'd just never been funded or trusted. My parents called asking if they could visit, their voices carrying a tone I'd never heard before, humility mixed with curiosity. They walked through my house slowly, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. I'd restored myself, hitting the refinished floors that glowed with golden warmth. My father stopped at the fireplace, running his hand along the mantel I'd carefully stripped and restained. "You did all this work yourself?" "Yes," I said simply, not elaborating or seeking praise. "Every weekend for 3 years." The built-in bookshelves I'd designed. The garden visible through the kitchen window. The cozy reading nook where morning light pooled perfectly. It wasn't marble or granite, but it had something Victoria's house never did. It had heart, character, and equity built through my own hands. My mother stood in the living room, turning slowly to take it all in, saying nothing at all. Victoria finally came by on a Sunday afternoon, her expression carefully neutral as I opened the door. She stepped inside and stopped in the entryway, her eyes moving from room to room with growing surprise. "This is really nice, Maggie," she said quietly. "I didn't expect." She didn't finish the sentence, but I heard what she wasn't saying. She hadn't expected me to create something genuinely beautiful. She hadn't expected me to succeed on my own terms. There was something in her voice that wasn't quite admiration. It was closer to shock mixed with the dawning realization that our positions had shifted without anyone noticing. She walked through slowly, touching surfaces, commenting on design choices. Professional, polite, careful. But I could see the moment she understood. My house was worth more now than hers. My equity was stronger. My financial position was more secure. The pedestal she'd stood on for so long had quietly eroded beneath her. The The public records showed Victoria's house closing 3 weeks later. I didn't search for the information. It appeared in my professional database during routine market research. They sold below what they owed. My parents absorbed a significant portion of the loss from their co-sign loan, probably depleting savings they'd planned to use for retirement travel. My own annual property valuation came back the same week. My equity had tripled since purchase. The neighborhood revitalization had exceeded even optimistic projections, with new development bringing young families and small businesses that further stabilized property values. I didn't announce these numbers at family dinners or casually mention them in conversation. I simply filed the documents away in my growing folder of financial records. But my parents discovered the information anyway. My mother had apparently started following real estate trends in my neighborhood online, perhaps finally recognizing she'd missed something important about my choices. We gathered at my kitchen table instead of theirs for the first time. My mother looked smaller somehow. Her usual confidence dimmed. My father kept glancing around at the details I'd created, the herb garden visible through the window, the restored light fixtures, the peaceful atmosphere I'd cultivated. I suppose, my mother said carefully, choosing her words, you've proven us wrong about a lot of things. Not an apology. Just reluctant acknowledgement that their assumptions had been incorrect. I set my coffee cup down gently. I was never unstable or incapable, I said without anger. Just clarity. I was just never funded or supported the way Victoria was. There's a difference. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words could. My father cleared his throat. We should have seen that sooner. It wasn't the full apology I'd once dreamed of hearing, but it was more honest than anything they'd said before. Victoria asked if we could meet for coffee the following week. She looked tired in ways that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I wanted to ask your advice, she said hesitantly. About downsizing. About making smarter financial choices going forward. For the first time in our entire lives, my capable, successful, perfect older sister was asking me for guidance. She saw me as someone with wisdom worth seeking. I agreed to help, but I set a boundary immediately. On one condition, I said firmly, no more comparisons between us. No more pedestals or competitions. We start fresh. Victoria met my eyes and nodded slowly. I can do that. Maybe we'd never be close. Maybe too much had happened, too many years of being pitted against each other. But we could at least be honest. We could at least respect what the other had survived. Months later, Victoria moved into a smaller but manageable home in a stable neighborhood. Something she could actually afford without stretching. Something that wouldn't control her life with crushing payments. My parents stopped measuring our lives against each other. They started actually listening when I spoke instead of waiting to redirect the conversation to Victoria's accomplishments. One evening, my father said something that surprised me. We were sitting on my back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the garden as the sun set. You built something we didn't understand, he said quietly. And I don't just mean the house. He was talking about resilience. About self-reliance. About the strength it takes to create something meaningful from nothing but determination and patience. They had laughed at me once, certain I'd never measure up to their golden child success. But I hadn't destroyed them in revenge. I hadn't gloated or rubbed their faces in their mistakes. I'd simply outgrown them. I'd built a life that didn't require their validation or their financial backing. And when Victoria stood in my living room months later and said softly, I wish I'd done things your way from the start, I realized something powerful. I hadn't just built a house. I'd built freedom from their expectations. I'd built proof that my worth wasn't determined by their investment or lack thereof. This time, they were the ones looking up at me. And I didn't need them to. I'd already learned to look up at myself.